I'm not an expert on relationships or a theologian. I'm just sharing what I'm learning. There's no God, then how come the world neatly fits into a chicken? What? That's a cogent argument, isn't it? I'm kidding. God made some people deep thinkers. They like to think about things deeply. That's good, that's strength. God gave different people different strengths. Some athletic ability, others people skills, others artistic ability. If you're a deep thinker, you think about things deeply. It's not enough if somebody says because when you pose a question, and that's a good thing. Thing is, if someone has faith, you need to give them a little bit of grace, sometimes. Some questions seem simple. They're like 1 or 2 sentences, but the answer is really long and involved. Like the question, why is the sky blue? Seems like a simple question. It's 1 sentence long. But when you get into it, light travels in waves, and each color wave is at a different frequency, and the sky is actually every color, but blue is the color that is reflected back at you, and that's the color you see, etc., etc. Not every person of faith knows those deep, intricate answers. They didn't come to faith through a long scientific treatise. Their path was different than yours. I'm sure you know that not every atheist knows all these deep, intricate answers either. Okay. Now, if evolution is true, then people have no intrinsic worth. They're just a product of time plus matter plus chance. Murder, rape, and robbery actually become, quote, moral, air quotes, because it's survival of the fittest. Everything becomes meaningless. But we know that people do have intrinsic worth, and these things are evil. There's morality and evil all around us. People have free will, and sometimes they use it to crash into each other, and sometimes they use it to do good to others. Depends on the individual. If you say there's such a thing as evil, then you're saying there's such a thing as good. And if you're saying there's such a thing as good, then there's such a thing as a moral law in which to differentiate good from evil. If you don't have a transcendent moral law, you're going by what people feel is right. In some cultures, they're cannibals and they eat their neighbor. In other cultures, they love their neighbors based on a feeling. It's like here today, gone tomorrow. If there's a transcendent moral law, you need a transcendent lawgiver. But that's what you're trying to disprove and not prove. If there's no moral lawgiver, there's no moral law. If there's no moral law, then there's no good or evil. And some people want to hold on to their theory of evolution, so they say we have to do away with the concept of evil to be consistent with their theory. So murder, rape, and robbery, those things aren't evil. And the victims of crime don't have justice. The reality of evil is still there in the real world, whether you name it or not. Makes me facepalm so hard. Why do we need a moral lawgiver? Well, the question of evil is usually raised by a person or about a person. Which means when the problem of evil is posited, it assumes the intrinsic worth of personhood. If there's no intrinsic value to personhood, the question self-destructs. Personhood is necessary for the question to be valid. That's why we can only justify the question if the person is the creation of a being of distinct worth, which is God himself. The question self-destructs if personhood is not valuable. Your life and my life assume intrinsic worth for the problem of evil question to be valid. And that intrinsic worth can only come if we're the creation of God himself and not the random product of time plus matter plus chance. Here's Vince Vitale talking about how one can know that God exists.
I thought faith had to be blind. I thought you couldn't give reasons for God. I thought you either had belief or you didn't, and that was the end of the matter. I was dead wrong. And if I could go back in my life and change one thing, if I could change just one thing in my entire life, it would be for someone to have told me earlier how wrong I was. For me, it wasn't until university that I became a Christian. Christianity makes some big claims. But here's a phrase I want you to remember today. Criticism without alternative is empty. All the way back to the beginning of the universe. Now, as Michael mentioned earlier, 100 years ago, scientists would have assumed that the universe didn't have a beginning, that it had just always existed. And one of the most significant advances, developments in science in the last 100 years has been that the majority of scientists have come to believe that the universe has a beginning. And one of the reasons they believe this has to do with fireworks. So scientists are now able to detect that the universe is actually expanding. It's expanding in all directions, a lot like the way a firework expands. And the picture that results then, if we trace back the expansion, is that the universe began with an utterly dense point, a singularity, and then like a firework, it exploded at the Big Bang. The Cambridge physicist Stephen Hawking says this: "All the evidence seems to indicate that the universe has not existed forever, but that it had a beginning about 15 billion years ago. This is probably the most remarkable discovery of modern cosmology, yet it is now taken for granted." The universe had a beginning. As a Christian, I think that beginning is explained when I open the first page of my Bible and I read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But if you don't believe in God, what is your alternative? The alternative is to say that the universe just popped into existence for no reason, with no explanation whatsoever. Now, this is a very weird claim. Okay, here's one depiction of it that I read recently. The belief that there was once absolutely nothing, and nothing happened to the nothing until the nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything and everywhere. Then a bunch of the exploded everything magically rearranged itself, for no reason whatsoever, into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs. Now that's having a bit of fun, but it's also making a reasonable point. Things generally don't just pop into existence and out of existence for no reason whatsoever. None of us have ever seen a table or a tiger or a Michael Ramsden just pop into existence out of nothing. If the universe began to exist, then there must be an explanation for its existence. And the best explanation that I know of is that God created it. The universe is incredibly finely tuned, incredibly designed for life. Let me explain what I mean by that. And so you take out a deck of cards and you start to play poker with Amy or Ewing. And in the first 12 rounds of poker, Amy gets 12 straight royal flushes. If you've never played poker, that would be like winning the lottery 12 times in a row. What should we think? Amy's cheating. Why? It's so incredibly unlikely for someone to get 12 straight royal flushes just by chance that someone must be messing with the cards. That we should come to a similar conclusion with respect to God. The universe we live in could have taken many different forms, infinitely many different forms. And scientists, not just Christian scientists, but scientists in general, have come to an agreement that there are dozens of features of the universe that had to be precisely the way they are for life to be possible. Not just human life, not just life on the planet Earth, but any form of life anywhere in the universe. Let me give you just one example of that. The explosive force of the Big Bang. That explosive force had to be within 1 part in 10 to the 60th of what it actually was in order for any life to be possible anywhere in the universe. In other words, the percentage difference that you could have while still accommodating the possibility of life is a 0 followed by a period, followed by 59 zeros, followed by a 1. If the Big Bang had been even the slightest bit weaker in its force, gravity would have collapsed the universe back in on itself almost immediately, with no time for life to form. If the force of the Big Bang had been even the slightest bit stronger, the universe would have just dispersed into thin air. All we would have got would have been cold, simple molecules. Particles wouldn't have been close enough to each other. We wouldn't have gotten anything like the complex chemistry that's necessary for life. That's just one example, and there are dozens more. One of the experts says that the likelihood of this occurring just by chance could be likened to a tornado blowing through a junkyard and just by chance producing a perfect 747 airplane as it went through. That's the sort of probabilities that we're working with. So the question is, how are we to explain this amazing coincidence? How are we to explain the royal flushes turning up hand after hand throughout the universe? I think we should come to the rational conclusion. The universe is not the result of randomness. Someone ordered the cards. Someone designed the universe. And this is just what the Bible claims. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse.